Project Management for Healthcare Managers, Week 4, Communication, HCML 375. Good communication is more than just talking. It is more than being able to do a good presentation. It is that vital skill to be able to have two-way communication. Exchange of information is critical in project management and is important in healthcare leadership and management as well. For our project management class, we are looking at communication being a vital skill in reporting status, to be able to share progress of a project, and to be able to connect with team members and establish team dynamics, to be able to keep leaders informed, and to share knowledge with customers. It is the thing that drives change management and influences people to be motivated. A basic model of communication includes encoding, transmitting messages, decoding, acknowledging, and feedback. The idea behind our basic visualization model of communication is that of a modem. Modems are devices that are on computers that modulate the signal, the computer signal, into a signal that travels over the phone line and then demodulates at the other end. So the word modem comes from modulate and demodulate. This really supports a good model of communication, that encoding is the modulator and modulate or demodulate is what receives and decodes the message. It works like this. When you have a sender that has an idea or a thought in their head, they will encode a message that includes the information about the idea, then transmits it to the receiver. The receiver will receive the message and they will decode the message. The message is more than just words. The messages are encoded in the things we say, the body language, and the way that they say it. Transmitting is complex, but is the only way to encode that idea or process into something that will be decoded by the receiver. Once the receiver decodes something, they are going to get an image or something in their mind that the sender won't be able to see. There is a general acceptance that messages transmitted was received, so that a similar idea or thought in the mind of the receiver. The way that this is confirmed is that there's an acknowledgement message that comes back to the encoder saying, this is the idea or the thought that I have in my head. When there is transmission and decoding that happens, it is vital to have an acknowledgement message that goes back to the sender. The sender should provide feedback on when the message was incorrect or give more information as needed to clarify the image or receiver. Typical communication is one-way street. One person sends and the other receives. But great communication is a cycle. One person sends and the other receives and acknowledges what they've heard, and the sender gives feedback to clarify. There are different forms of communication, and this is a short list of some basic types. One set of forms is the internal and external. In project management, the internal form of communication are things like status reports and issues lists, information about the project that is relevant to the sponsor of the project team. External are things like, how do we get our customers to know something, or an announcement that includes print media or mail information. There is formal and informal communication. Formal might be a business letter that is sent, where informal communication might be just standing around the water cooler, talking back and forth. Vertical and horizontal communication has to do with communicating based on an orientation to an org chart. You may communicate differently with your leaders than the people you lead. You may also communicate with your team horizontally or to other department managers that are on the same level. Official communication relies on policies and procedures and is usually formal. And unofficial tends to be less informal and less structured. How the message is transmitted may be audible or visual or both. Written messages or listening to a voicemail or recorded presentation is one way, and without acknowledgement or feedback, this form of communication can be problematic when the messages aren't understood. Two-way communication is usually verbal and is what people say and hear, and nonverbal is body language that accompanies the verbal message. Studies show that nonverbal communication is usually more significant than verbal. That is, how you say a message has a bigger impact than what you say. The last set of forms has to do with how the communication is directed. If a message is announced or initiated from a source, this is a push. If the receiver or audience is asking for the information, this would be a pull. Interactive communication is an exchange of information that usually comes in two flavors. One interaction is a discussion where ideas are passed back and forth, with both sides giving evidence why they are right. The other is a dialogue, when one side listens and understands before sharing their idea. Some factors that affect communication are target audience, communication media, the type of information or message, and the frequency of the communication. The target audience is who you are communicating with. You should always communicate in the frame of reference of the target audience. Some of the key messages that you may want to think of when you're communicating with leaders or sponsors should focus on what information is most important to them in their frame of reference. What they really want to know is this going to cost more, or is it going to be done on time? So when giving status up to a leader, these are the key messages you want to focus on. Leaders also appreciate it when you're concise and to the point. When communicating to the project management team, they really want to know what's in it for me, what's my role, what are the next steps that I'll be doing. So within a project management team, they're not as concerned about is it going to cost more, but what are those things that are happening within the project? What are the next steps? The customer doesn't need to know if it's going to cost more or less. And they're going to look at, how does this impact me? Or am I going to receive enough training? Or am I going to understand this change? Depending on your target audience, you can have a different message from project management. How the message is transmitted is really important. One of the simplest ways is just talking, to have one-on-one conversation. There are other types of communication media that need to be considered when communicating about projects. Email is one of the most widely used types of communication. It's low cost, but it also has low trust, and is easily misunderstood or ignored. Newsletter or web page may have a little bit more of a medium cost, but it does not carry much trust, and the message is not focused because it's usually set up for a general audience. A town hall, where someone is actually engaging people, encourages more trust. And it may be about the same cost as a newsletter or web page, but doing a town hall with a leader that is engaged and talking to people may have a medium cost and more trust than a newsletter. A small group or one-on-one can be a higher cost in terms of time, but you're also establishing a high amount of trust. So consider the type of message you're dealing with when deciding the message to distribute a message. If it is something that really doesn't need a lot of trust behind it, such as basic information sharing, then email or newsletter might be a good way to get that message out. But if you have a message that requires a lot of trust, where the engagement is really critical, you may want to think about small groups or doing one-on-one to make sure the message has the right impact. The communication technology factors need to be evaluated when creating a communication plan. One of the things to think about when planning communication is, what's the urgency of need for information? When are you planning communication? A status report that identifies things are on track and on time doesn't necessarily need urgency. However, a high priority issue may need urgency, and faster communication is needed. Availability of technology is a concern for many companies, especially ones that are located in different locations. Video conferencing or messaging devices are useful in companies that have offices in different cities, because everyone gets connected by technology, and it's vital that the technology actually works. Part of the communication technology is, how easy is it to use? Some programs, like email, is easy to use and supports a high volume of communication. Sometimes security is critical, When deciding what kinds of things are important in the project and need to be communicated, that communication may be sensitive or confidential. Security needs to be considered when you're looking at technology and communicating on email or the internet, especially in healthcare. During the project life cycle, you have different types of meetings. The type of meeting you're having determines the audience and the type of information you'll be sharing. During a kickoff meeting, you're typically meeting with leaders in the project team to give an overview of the project. During this meeting, you may identify what's in it for me for the team members. You might conduct an icebreaker, get the team members introduced to each other, and set some ground rules and norms of how you're going to work together. Once you've been working for a while, you will have status meetings. These are for reporting project progress and work completed so far. It also may be where people come together and work through problems. If there's not much going on a project, status might not be given through meetings, but could be sent by email when it's only acknowledgement or some type of light status that needs to be provided. If there's a lot of status updates to be provided, or if there's critical items that need to be communicated, then an in-person status meeting is a better option. A status meeting may be a good place to go over issues, or issue review may be separate from status meetings. Issue review and resolution meetings are typically in person, so you can drive collaboration and get to resolutions for each issue. Knowledge sharing can be done in different ways, through multimedia or through teaching or coaching. The best type of teaching or coaching has a direct impact on the learner, where the learner is open to learning, where the message is something important, and the learner is ready to accept the information and be willing to change. Think proactively throughout the project about communication planning. Who needs the information? What kind of information do they need? Thinking in terms of your target audience and what kind of information is needed by leaders, what kind of information is needed by the team, and what is needed by the customers. How often do they need to be informed or communicated to? And then, how should the information be distributed? Consider the type of information, the communication media, and the trust values when planning communication. A good way of organizing a communication plan is to complete a grid like this. Filling in each of the sections and answering the question, who is the audience, what is the message, and how often do the meetings need to occur, will help guide the planning for communication. Is this a kickoff meeting, a status meeting, or an informational meeting? Include most of the meeting types that occur routinely in projects. Identifying what the purpose or message of the meeting is, and then how is it going to be conducted, will help create an agenda. An agenda is a great tool for effective meetings, and this grid can be used to fill in an agenda template. A kickoff meeting is best done in person, or a status meeting may be in person or by email. And then who's responsible for that distribution sets accountability for setting up the meeting and sending out the agendas. Finally, in communication, think about the acknowledgement message or the feedback message to be sure the message gets through correctly. For every type of message that is out there, there should be some sort of feedback loop with communication to be sure it is getting through. There also needs to be some way to evaluate and monitor communication. A good way to test communication is to ask for feedback from some of the group members, or to have a debriefing session, or to have a survey sent back after the event. In review, we talked about the basic model of communication, the mental models behind communication, the parts that include encoding, transmitting message, decoding, acknowledging the message, and using feedback to make sure both parties understood the meaning behind the message. Different forms of communication ask, how does communication happen? Who is the target audience? What are the communication medias? And what are the types of communication that needs to happen in project management? Communication planning is intentionally thinking about how communication will be managed through the course of the project.